Welcome back to the deep dive, where we explore the trends, technologies, and regulatory shifts shaping the future of life sciences. My name's Anna.
And I'm Eric. Today we're talking about one of the biggest transformations in regulatory oversight in the last decade, the rise of risk-based regulation and the expansion of remote inspections.
This shift didn't happen overnight. Regulators were already moving toward risk based frameworks long before the pandemic, but COVID-19 accelerated everything. Suddenly, the FDA, EMA, MHRA, every agency around the world had to rethink how to maintain oversight when inspectors literally couldn't travel.
And instead of pausing the system, they evolved it fast. We saw the rapid adoption of remote document reviews, virtual facility walkthroughs, live-streamed equipment checks, digital batch record audits, and risk-prioritized inspections. It fundamentally changed how agencies verify compliance.
What's interesting is that even now, years later, remote inspections aren't going away. They've become a permanent part of the oversight toolbox, especially for lower risk products or facilities with strong compliance histories. This hybrid model is shaping the future of regulatory expectations.
And the risk-based part is key. Traditional inspections focused heavily on procedural compliance, checking SOPs, verifying training records, walking the floor. But risk-based regulation shifts the focus to what actually impacts patient safety and product quality.
Exactly. Think about FDA's case for quality, ICHQ9, or EMA's risk based GMP approaches. Inspectors are leaner and more targeted now. Instead of reviewing everything, they zoom in on the highest risk systems, like sterile operations, data integrity, supply chain vulnerabilities, or major process changes.
And companies are feeling that shift. If a site has a history of strong compliance, mature quality systems, stable processes, and low-risk product categories, they're more likely to receive a remote or abbreviated inspection. But if there's a recall, a major deviation, a quality signal, or inconsistent performance, the agency is going to show up on site.
That's the evolution. Regulators aren't just asking, did you follow the SOP? They're asking, do your systems consistently protect patients? And that's reshaping how companies prepare for inspections.
Remote oversight also means regulators are using more technology than ever before. We've seen FDA leverage secure portals, shared digital evidence rooms, and structured data formats for electronic submissions. MHRA has used video walkthroughs, drone footage inside warehouses, and even timestamped location verified live streams.
And companies have had to adjust. Some had to digitize their entire document management strategy practically overnight. Paper batch records, manual logs, locally stored spreadsheets, none of that works when an inspector is reviewing everything through a remote portal.
One thing we hear a lot from clients is that remote inspections expose weaknesses faster because there's no buffer. When you screen share a batch record, every typo, every unclear deviation statement, every missing signature is instantly visible on the inspector's screen.
And there's another layer to this. Remote inspections rely heavily on a company's ability to demonstrate control through data. So, if your metrics are inaccurate, if your kappa trends don't make sense, if your change control data doesn't align with your complaints, regulators will spot that immediately.
It's pushed organizations to clean up inconsistencies, improve data governance, and strengthen their systems before an inspection even starts.
Another big change is pre inspection preparation. In the past, you might spend weeks getting a war room ready, pulling binders, rehearsing SME responses. Now, companies need something closer to an always inspection ready digital environment because many remote assessments start with minimal notice.
And risk-based frameworks amplify that. Regulators want to know you're not just cleaning up for inspection day. You're running a controlled operation all the time. Your data, your training, your documentation, your supplier quality, your validations, they should be consistently reliable, not temporarily polished.
It's also shifting the mindset of industry leaders. Instead of building systems merely to pass inspections, companies are building systems that lower their risk profile over time. Because now your risk profile influences whether you're inspected remotely or in person, how frequently, and how deeply the agency probes.
That's a huge shift. Risk-based regulation connects compliance behavior with real operational incentives. The more robust your systems, the less disruptive your oversight becomes.
And we're only seeing the beginning. Agencies are piloting AI supported risk scoring, machine learning to analyze inspection histories, and predictive modeling to identify facilities that may need increased scrutiny. The future is going to feel a lot more data driven.
So today we're going to break down that journey, how remote inspections evolved, what risk-based oversight means in practice, what regulators expect now, and how companies can build inspection-ready systems in a hybrid world.
And we'll also talk about what Emma International is seeing on the ground because the readiness gaps, the digital challenges, and the quality system weaknesses that remote inspections reveal are very real. And companies are still figuring out how to adapt.
Let's start by breaking down how regulators actually assess risk now, because this is something that's changed dramatically. 10 years ago, risk assessment was mostly descriptive. A company would list potential risks, assign a likelihood score, and call it a day. But today, risk-based oversight is far more dynamic.
Right. Agencies aren't just looking at what you say your risks are, they're looking at data across your entire quality system. Batch failure trends, CAPA recurrence rates, complaint patterns, supplier performance, even how consistently you meet filing deadlines, all of that feeds into a site's overall risk profile.
And that risk profile influences the type of inspection you receive. If you're trending stable with strong controls, you might get a remote assessment. But if regulators see signals, like repeated deviations involving the same equipment, or OOS rates creeping up, that's when an on-site inspection becomes almost inevitable.
And sometimes companies don't realize how clearly those patterns stand out from the outside. We've worked with organizations who thought they were managing issues internally, only to discover that regulators had already flagged their trends as emerging risks months earlier.
That transparency is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it pushes companies to fix systemic issues earlier. On the other, it exposes weak spots instantly. And remote inspections magnify this, because your data sets are sent electronically. There's no opportunity to talk through a discrepancy before the inspector sees it.
And I think one of the biggest learning curves has been around data integrity. Remote inspections really shine a light on whether companies have a sustainable approach to Alcoa principles, whether data is attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, even when no inspector is physically on site.
What's interesting is that many companies assumed remote inspections would be easier. They thought, well, if we're not being physically inspected, maybe it'll feel lighter. But what actually happened is the complete opposite. Remote inspections are often more intense because documents are reviewed in real time, with no buffer, no physical delays, and no break rooms to regroup between questions.
And the questions tend to be more targeted. Agencies are asking, show me the last 5 deviations tied to this line. Share your audit trail for this instrument. Pull your supplier qualification package. Every request is surgical and immediate.
It's forced companies to modernize. Paper-only systems don't work anymore. Scanned PDFs with missing metadata don't work. Disorganized shared drives don't work. The expectation now is accessibility, traceability, and control instantly.
It's also shifting how companies manage SMEs during inspections. In the past, you'd have everyone in a physical war room ready to jump in. With remote inspections, SMEs may be in different locations, calling in virtually, sharing screens. That requires coordination. You can't rely on hallway conversations or quick sidebars.
And that brings up the cultural shift. Remote inspections demand discipline, clear communication, consistency across documents, departments, and digital systems. If your quality management system is fragmented, regulatory on one platform, engineering on another, operations using spreadsheets, inspectors will see that fragmentation immediately.
And all of this ties back to patient risk. Regulators aren't pushing for modernization to make companies work harder. They're doing it because today's products are more complex, supply chains are more fragile, and the margin for error is shrinking.
Exactly. Think about biologics, personalized medicine, combination products, advanced digital tools. The technologies that define modern healthcare require oversight that is faster, smarter, and more data driven.
And risk based regulation is the only way to keep up. You can't treat every product, every facility, and every supplier the same. Oversight has to be proportional and informed by real world, real time risk signals.
One of the most interesting improvements has been supplier oversight. Pre pandemic, supplier audits were almost always done in person. Now, remote supplier audits are common, and that has pushed companies to demand more digital transparency from their vendors.
And because regulators expect the sponsor to own supplier risks, companies are strengthening their supplier quality agreements, implementing live dashboards of supplier performance, and requiring digital audit trails for critical materials.
It's become a full ecosystem shift. Risk based thinking isn't just for internal operations, it's for supply chains, contract manufacturers, test labs, and software providers. Everyone has to operate with the same level of readiness.
And that's why companies who embrace risk based quality are seeing benefits beyond regulatory compliance. They reduce scrap, improve reliability, shorten investigations, and make better resource decisions. Risk based regulation is driving operational excellence.
So when people ask whether remote inspections are temporary, the answer is no. They're part of a permanent evolution, one where regulators focus on what truly matters, and companies are expected to build systems that can demonstrate control at any moment.
And coming up next, we're going deeper into how companies are adapting, the technologies they're adopting, the gaps regulators are still seeing, and the strategies that separate inspection ready organizations from those still playing catch up.
Let's talk about the technology piece now, because it's become the backbone of how companies stay inspection ready in a risk based world. One of the biggest transformations has been the shift toward fully digital quality systems. Not partial digitization, not hybrid, fully digital.
And regulators are starting to expect that. When an inspector can request a deviation report, an audit trail, or a batch record and see it in seconds, it changes the whole dynamic. Digital traceability isn't a nice to have anymore, it's essential for demonstrating control.
Exactly. And with remote inspections, digital evidence is the inspection. Inspectors aren't walking the floor, so they rely on the accuracy and completeness of the data they see. If your audit trails are messy, if your documentation isn't standardized, or if your system architecture is fragmented, that becomes a direct risk signal.
One thing we're seeing more of is automated trend analysis. Instead of a human trying to track deviations or quality events over time, companies are using advanced analytics to identify weak signals, small early indicators of a potential systemic failure.
And those early indicators are powerful. For example, a manufacturer might notice a subtle upward trend in OOS results linked to a particular raw material. Without analytics, that trend could go unnoticed for months. With automated alerts, the company can investigate immediately, before a regulator sees it in the data and flags it as a lack of control.
And the same thing is happening in equipment monitoring. Predictive maintenance systems are cutting down on unplanned downtime, contamination events, and batch failures. When you can forecast equipment drift or performance degradation, you prevent deviations before they happen.
This is actually where risk based regulation and digitalization come together. Regulators want companies to use data proactively, not just as historical documentation. The expectation is identify risk earlier, address it earlier, and demonstrate that your systems are robust enough to keep up with modern manufacturing.
And here's the interesting part: companies that embrace digital tools are finding that inspections go smoother because their house is truly in order, not just on paper, not just for show, but structurally disciplined in a way that stands up to scrutiny.
That's the key word discipline. Digital maturity isn't just software, it's governance, defined workflows, access controls, consistent metadata, version control. That's where many organizations struggle during remote inspections. The software is fine, but the governance is inconsistent.
And inspectors spot that instantly. If two people collect data differently, or if naming conventions are inconsistent, or if versions of the same document don't match across sites, those inconsistencies become compliance risks.
And I think what surprises companies is how quickly inspectors can navigate a digital system. They're trained now. They know what a complete audit trail looks like. They know where data integrity issues typically hide. They can spot manipulated timestamps, missing entries, or forced re-signatures instantly.
That's why internal audit programs have had to evolve. Traditional checklist style audits aren't enough. Companies are conducting mock remote inspections, reviewing digital workflows, and performing risk based document sampling to find weak points before regulators do.
And this ties into something we haven't talked about yet, the global nature of remote inspections. The FDA has conducted remote inspections of European, Asian, and Latin American sites without ever stepping foot in the facility. That means your operational maturity is no longer protected by geography.
There's no longer a scenario where a company says, we'll fix that site later, or it's not a priority. Every site is accessible, every site is reviewable, and every site must be inspection ready at all times.
That's a huge cultural shift, especially for multinational organizations. Remote oversight means there's nowhere to hide. If one site is struggling, it affects the entire global risk profile. And regulators are increasingly using information sharing networks to coordinate risk flags.
And because of that, companies are adopting unified global quality systems, global training frameworks, and standardized procedures. It reduces variability, it reduces compliance risk, and it improves the organization's ability to respond quickly when regulators request information.
It also strengthens resilience. When you have shared systems and global visibility, you can shift workload, redistribute production, or support a struggling site much more efficiently. Risk-based regulation doesn't just reshape inspections, it reshapes operations.
And let's mention one more big development: hybrid inspections. These combine remote document review with targeted on site visits, allowing regulators to be far more efficient. Instead of spending 5 days on site, they might spend 1 day walking the floor and 4 days reviewing data remotely.
And hybrid inspections make every minute count. Inspectors arrive already knowing your trends, your risks, your documentation gaps. That means companies have to be prepared to address issues quickly. There's no warm-up period.
And that's why risk based quality systems are becoming so essential. If your processes are mature, digital, and aligned with regulatory expectations, hybrid inspections can actually be smoother than traditional ones. But if your house is disorganized, hybrid inspections expose it faster than ever.
Let's get into the areas where companies consistently stumble during remote and risk-based inspections, because the patterns are remarkably similar across the industry. One of the biggest gaps, hands down, is data integrity. And not in the dramatic fraud sense people imagine. It's the subtle issues: incomplete audit trails, missing operator annotations, inconsistent timestamps, unexplained gaps in environmental monitoring data. When everything is digital, those gaps become highly visible.
And regulators zero in on them fast. Even minor inconsistencies create a bigger question. If this data isn't clean, what else might be compromised? In a risk based environment, inspectors follow the breadcrumbs. One gap can lead to a much broader investigation.
Another major gap is documentation sprawl. Companies think they're inspection ready because their documents exist somewhere. But during a remote inspection, you don't get points for somewhere. If it's not findable in seconds, it's not useful.
Exactly. Inspectors don't wait 15 minutes for document hunting. They want instantaneous access. Companies with decentralized document structures, multiple SharePoint sites, multiple local drives, uncontrolled naming conventions, struggle immediately.
Then there's the classic kappa problem. Not the kappas themselves, but the follow-through. A lot of companies still struggle with incomplete root cause analysis, kappas that don't actually address the systemic issue, or verifications of effectiveness that aren't well documented.
And kappa is one of the first levers regulators pull when they assess risk. If your system shows a pattern of shallow investigations or repeated recurrence of the same issue, that's a red flag. Remote or on site, that hasn't changed.
Training records are another. Companies underestimate how much regulators rely on training to assess procedural maturity. If procedures change and employees aren't retrained immediately, that's a compliance risk. And in centralized digital training systems, inspectors can see those gaps in seconds.
It's the same with supplier oversight. Remote inspections brought supplier management into sharper focus because regulators know disruptions are coming from upstream. So, if your supplier controls, audits, and quality agreements aren't robust, that becomes a direct vulnerability.
And to be fair, the supply chain has been unpredictable, but regulators expect companies to respond with modern tools: vendor risk scoring, digital supplier dashboards, real-time incoming quality verification. The expectation is proactive oversight, not reactive troubleshooting.
Workforce gaps are becoming a risk signal too. When inspectors see high turnover, limited cross training, or staffing shortages during critical shifts, it raises concerns about process reliability. And remote inspections often include live interviews, which makes these gaps more visible.
That ties into another challenge. Companies often underprepare staff for remote inspector interactions. In a traditional inspection, inspectors walk around and observe natural workflow. In a remote inspection, they ask very targeted questions. Employees need to understand the system, not just the SOP.
And companies that train employees only to recite procedures get exposed quickly. Inspectors can tell when someone is repeating words versus understanding process intent.
Another point worth highlighting: poor change management. In a world where equipment, software, and processes are constantly being updated, regulators expect tight control. If your change records aren't aligned across quality, engineering, and operations, that inconsistency becomes a risk.
And remote inspections make misalignment obvious. Inspectors can cross reference system data with documentation instantly. If the equipment shows one version and your SOP shows another, that discrepancy is a compliance problem.
So those are the gaps companies stumble over. But let's pivot into what leading organizations are doing differently, the practices that make them stand out in remote and risk-based inspections.
And the first is digital fluency. Not just having digital tools, but being fluent in them. Companies with unified digital platforms, strong metadata governance, and consistent document structures sail through remote inspections.
They treat digital readiness like a compliance asset, not a technology project. And that mindset shows. When inspectors request a document and it appears instantly, it sends a signal of operational maturity.
Another best practice is integrated risk modeling. High performing companies map operational risks, regulatory risks, supply risks, and digital risks into a unified framework. They don't manage risk in silos, they show regulators a holistic view.
Which is exactly what the FDA's current guidance encourages. The agency doesn't want a binder called risk management. They want risk to be part of how you operate daily.
And speaking of holistic approaches, some companies are adopting inspection rehearsal programs, mock inspections designed to simulate real regulatory pressure. These help employees practice answering questions, help teams refine document access, and help leadership identify weak points before regulators do.
They're incredibly effective because they do more than prepare people. They reveal system-level issues, inconsistent SOPs, missing data, unclear ownership across departments. Fixing those proactively is what puts companies ahead.
Finally, leading companies embrace transparency. When gaps exist, and every organization has them, mature companies acknowledge them, show documented plans to remediate them, and demonstrate progress. Inspectors respond well to honesty backed by structure.
That's a key point. Remote inspections make it harder to hide weaknesses, but they also give companies new tools to demonstrate strength. Data visibility can work both ways.
Coming up Up next, we're diving into how risk based regulation will evolve over the next decade, including AI assisted inspections, predictive compliance, and how operational maturity will become a competitive differentiator across the entire life sciences sector.
As we close out today's conversation, I think the biggest takeaway is this: the shift to risk based regulation and remote inspections isn't a temporary adaptation, it's a structural change in how global regulators operate.
Exactly. We're not going back to the old model where compliance was measured mostly through on site observation. Regulators now expect companies to demonstrate digital maturity, proactive risk management, and real time transparency, because that's what modern manufacturing demands.
And when you look across the industry, the companies that thrive under this new model share a common mindset. They see compliance not as a checkpoint, but as an ongoing capability, something that's built into the culture, the systems, and the daily decisions, not pulled together at the last minute.
That mindset drives operational maturity. It means your documentation is clean because your processes are clean. It means your employees answer confidently because they understand why they do what they do, not just how. And it means your digital infrastructure is designed to support visibility, not just storage.
And regulators pick up on that immediately. A mature, organized, and risk aware operation creates a sense of predictability. And predictability is what regulators trust. It signals that even if issues arise, the company has the systems to detect them early and address them effectively.
The other big theme today is that resilience and compliance are becoming inseparable. Supply chain performance, cybersecurity, workforce stability, digital systems, they're all now part of the regulatory narrative. Inspectors aren't just verifying safety and efficacy, they're assessing whether your organization can continue operating safely under stress.
And that's why this evolution matters so much. It pushes life science companies to strengthen the very foundations of their operations. Better data governance, better risk modeling, better supplier oversight, better communication between departments. It's a shift that makes companies stronger, not just more compliant.
And honestly, it's an opportunity. Remote inspections can level the playing field for smaller companies that invest early in digital readiness. Risk based oversight rewards organizations that build strong systems, not just large ones. There's real competitive advantage in being inspection ready every single day.
That's the future we're heading toward. Continuous compliance, supported by digital traceability and proactive risk thinking. It's more transparent, more consistent, and more aligned with how fast the life sciences industry is evolving.
So, whether you're preparing for your first remote inspection or strengthening your risk management framework, remember this: regulators aren't looking for perfection. They're looking for control, clarity, and commitment to improvement. If you can demonstrate that, you can thrive in this new era.
Thank you for joining us for today's deep dive. If your organization needs support preparing for remote inspections, enhancing your risk based regulatory strategy, or modernizing your quality systems, Emma International is here to help. You can reach us anytime at info@emmainternational.com or visit us at emmainternational.com.
Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and Spotify so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay innovative.